They say the internet never forgets, but in an office of 80 people, one careless keystroke gets around faster than memory. What started as a private thank you became a public revealing, and by the time the inbox settled the next morning, a dozen lives in that department had shifted, some in small, tender ways, others in ways that would hum for months. Hi, I'm Eva. I manage digital content at a mid-sized nonprofit downtown. Today, I'll tell you about the week one innocent reply all turned our tightly scheduled department into a theater of awkwardness, compassion, and a lesson about how fragile privacy can be at work. This is a true story. Names are changed, but the feeling is exactly how it happened. We were the sort of department that lived by calendars and Slack pings. Our days were parceled into client calls, content calendars, and approval loops measured in minutes. People had routines. Dan brought his thermos at 8:30. May always sat by the window, and Sarah, who had been on leave for 2 months, had just returned to us the week before. Small ecosystems make for efficient workplaces, and efficient workplaces make for fragile social tapestries. The email landed on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk with 2 tabs open and a frantic caffeine buzz. An internal thread had been circulating about budgets. I remember glancing at the subject line, Q2 resource allocation, and then at my Slack, and then at the hum of the office outside my glass. Dan, our quiet content strategist, had been pulled into that thread off and on. He's the kind of person who keeps his feelings neatly folded, like paper in a desk. He's also the person people go to when a slide needs rescuing 5 minutes before a pitch. When he struck the keys that day, he meant a private message to our manager, Claire, a woman who keeps her calendar like a religion and her door like a safe. He wanted to thank her for the quiet support she'd given him during a rough family stretch. His father had had a sudden hospitalization, and Dan had been juggling hospital visits with deliverables. He wrote something short, human and honest. Gratitude for the flexibility. A small apology for delayed replies. A fleeting note that the worst of it was passing. Soft, private, human. Instead of hitting reply, Dan hit reply all. The split second between the email leaving his fingers and the first ping is the kind of time that compresses gravity. Everyone's inboxes lit up. Dozens of devices pinged. And for a moment, the whole department existed in the small glowing rectangle of a single message. The email wasn't a confession. It wasn't messy. It was simply a person admitting he'd been struggling and thanking another person for kindness. In most human terms, that should have been enough. Our culture insists on being quietly professional, so the stunned laugh was almost involuntary. A couple of people smacked their foreheads with the palm of their hand. Someone in procurement, God bless them, typed, "Oops," and another replied with a string of laughing emojis. But that laugh rippled into something else. Well-meaning colleagues hit reply all to offer their sympathies, and suddenly the inbox bloomed with responses that everyone felt the urge to perform. The first wave was straightforward. "So glad things are turning the corner, Dan. Thinking of you. If you need anything, let us know." These were normal courtesies, and I clicked them with relief. But then the tone shifted, sending thoughts and prayers. "You'll get through this. Let us know if the family needs meal trains. My partner loves cooking." The replies multiplied and became more personal. People who had never directly spoken to Dan before posted things like, "You're stronger than you know. Don't let this beat you." Or worse, "Make sure you're using your leave properly." The last one felt like a coin dropped into an otherwise sympathetic fountain, heavy, cold, and ugly. That was the first lesson. Well-meaning is not the same as wise. The department's collective desire to respond rapidly converted intimacy into theater. Offices are curious places. We like to translate private pain into public comfort because it makes us feel we've done something. But feverish kindness can be another form of exposure. Dan did his best. He replied, carefully, to thank people and to say that he appreciated the support. Then he did something the whole department watched in real time with a mix of relief and anxiety. He wrote a short, composed note that acknowledged the misclick, asked people not to discuss the details, and said he'd be back to his usual cadence soon. The room exhaled. But the show wasn't over. Inevitably, someone forwarded the thread to a buddy who thought it hilarious. And in 50 minutes the email had a new audience. a couple of other departments, and, for a delicious moment of modern office horror, a vendor on the thread who'd been CC'd months before and somehow still categorized as a relevant contact. The forward button had a talent for converting a small domestic scene into an accidental town square. I'll be blunt. My first instinct was amusement. I love the absurdities of office life, and this was a delicious one. But amusement quickly gave way to unease. The misstep had revealed something private about a person's life. Privacy in the workplace is a delicate, unstated social contract. We expect to see each other's faces at meetings and our Slack handles in the morning, but we don't expect to be invited into the intimate rooms of each other's lives uninvited, especially not by accident. That night, Dan sat at his kitchen table, and I imagine the silence felt different. A house lamp, a half-cold dinner, a neat little note that he had never wanted read out loud. He'd been honest because Claire had been kind. He'd been honest because at some point we are all tired of pretending we're always fully functional. He'd been honest because gratitude is human. For that candor he was rewarded, briefly, with a flood of polite sympathy, and then, for a smaller number of people, judgment. The following day the hum in the office had changed. Some people were sheepish. Some pretended not to notice. A few, in awkward attempts at solidarity, asked Dan in person if he was doing okay, which, for someone with a tender wound, can feel like a second probing. Human curiosity is a double-edged thing. It wants to reach with comfort, but often does so with fingers. The more consequential reaction came from Claire herself. It's one thing for colleagues to respond with empathy, and another when a manager models the right comportment. Claire did not call a huddle to dramatize Dan's situation. She sent a very simple note to the department. It read in essence, "Thank you all for your concern." Dan's message was personal and private. Please respect that privacy. If you'd like to help, channel it through official ways. Donation links or meal trains can be coordinated through XYZ. Let's be mindful of boundaries. That line, gentle, administrative, exact, cooled things. It reminded everyone that workplaces need both warmth and structure. Claire's reply was a small masterstroke. It offered a channel for kindness and set a limit to public airing of private matters. In offices, we are always in danger of confusing fellowship for entitlement, and she had found a way to keep both without demonizing either. Still, there were aftershocks. A well-meaning senior director wrote an unsolicited paragraph about resilience and balancing priorities, which read in many ways like a lecture. A junior staffer who'd once experienced family illness and left the company a year earlier wrote a discreet, private message to Dan offering an ear and some resources. This one landed like a true ally. The pattern that became visible over the week wasn't about the initial mistake. It was about how people chose to respond to human fragility, with performative pronouncements, with practical offers, or with quiet discretion. There are a couple of moments worth pausing on, because they reveal the social DNA of a workplace. One afternoon, in the elevator, a woman I'd only interviewed with once stopped me and said, "I didn't think about the power of reply all before. I always did it to save time." She laughed to diffuse the awkwardness, then added, "Now I try to imagine if that were my note." The humanizing mental exercise stuck with me. It's a cheap empathy test. Before you post, imagine how you'd feel if the words were attached to your own life. Another micro moment that warmed the whole department happened almost quietly. May, who rarely spoke in meetings, organized a small collection to help Dan with taxi rides between the hospital and home. She posted a discreet survey with options to donate or sign up to cover a shift. It was tangible. It was private. It was helpful. Dan accepted, thanked everyone privately, and told May that the practical help had been more meaningful than the public declarations. Part of what made the week memorable was how fragile anonymity is when groups gather. In larger organizations, a reply all is an anonymous ripple. In small to medium ones, it's like stepping onto a stage. Your private life isn't private for long if it appears in an inbox that pings 80 people. That truth has consequences. People began to write differently. Subject lines changed. People started using the R instead of reply all in Slack, and some even took 2 seconds to double check. There was a secondary, subtler lesson too. vulnerability in public can be a lightning rod for kindness. The public confession could have been weaponized, and a few people did weaponize it in small ways, passive judgments and gossip. But the overall arc was softer than I feared. What started as a potential humiliation became an opportunity for people to act with generosity. The department's instinct to respond quickly was messy, but the instinct to help materially was quiet and strong. At the end of that week, Claire convened a short meeting, not to rehearse the accident, but to propose a simple protocol for future communications. Use subject line prefixes for personal matters, e.g., private. Include a note about expected reach, and when in doubt, send direct messages. She framed it as courtesy and care, which was a phrase that struck everyone as both practical and humane. The policy was small. Its impact was outsized. People used it, and for the next months the department's inboxes felt a touch less like public squares and more like functional tools. Dan moved on, not because of anything malicious, but because life had moved him. He took a temporary remote schedule for 2 months, and then transitioned to a part-time arrangement while his father recovered. He returned later with a new rhythm. The episode didn't become a scar he'd have to bear forever. In fact, his candidness made him, strangely, more human to colleagues who had barely known him beyond deadlines and deliverables. That is the curious thing about letting people see you fragile. It narrows the distance between coworker and fellow human. There's a truth that sits at the heart of this little office tale. Digital mistakes reveal what's already there. Our reply all misclick did not create curiosity or helpfulness. It exposed it. It exposed where people would rush theatrically and where they would act quietly, where management would soothe and where it would lecture. And it exposed the ways we can build systems that protect dignity. Simple markers like private in a subject line, a routine reminder about boundaries, and a culture that treats disclosures as not a spectacle but a call to practical care. I walked out of the office that Friday with the echo of the week in my ears, the pinging of phones, the small, earnest messages, the real offers of rides and dinner. The episode was small in the ledger of life events, but it was a bellwether for culture. Offices, like cities, are built from small gestures. A misplaced reply can jerk a river off course. A thoughtful reply can widen it again. If you take anything from this, let it be 2 things. First, pause before you hit reply all. Imagine the message attached to your own life. Second, when someone accidentally makes the private public, choose the path that keeps dignity intact. Send a private message, offer concrete help, or do nothing at all rather than turning vulnerability into theater. We are always, in small ways, choosing what kind of workplace we want to be. That week, 80 people decided, mostly by habit, sometimes by intent, what that answer looked like. For a missent thank you, the department grew a fraction kinder, a fraction wiser, and a little more careful with the small, human things that make workplaces livable.